Zelda games are not known for their moral ambiguity. The line that separates the light and those who uphold it from those who lurk in the darkness is generally a rather stark line indeed. Cue Twilight Princess, a game with a particular plot point that had me squinting my eyes at the quote-unquote good guys. It got me wondering, given all we know about the game and its connection to the broader series, was Ganondorf's execution justified? So what in the world am I talking about? Of course it was justified, I hear you shouting. This is Ganondorf, video game's most recognizable villain, the embodiment of corrupted power, the very manifestation of pure evil, etc., etc. I mean, yeesh. Well, the story in Twilight Princess goes like this. After conquering Star-Lord, Link and Midna enter the Mirror Chamber atop the Arbiter's grounds in an attempt to gain entry into the Twilight Realm. Instead, they find the Mirror of Twilight broken, and the sages retell the story of one Ganondorf Dragmire's botched execution, describing him in glowing terms. He was known as a demon thief, an evil magic wielder renowned for his ruthlessness. But he was blind. In all his fury and might, he was blind to any danger, and thus was he exposed, subdued, and brought to justice. Alrighty then, that seems pretty cut and dry, except there's a further complication. See, Nintendo walks this strange line where they want Zelda games to function as standalone experiences, even those connected to other titles, Twilight Princess notwithstanding, as confirmed in a 2007 interview by the game's director Eiji Aonuma, who said it takes place in the world of Ocarina of Time several hundred years later. Those whose first game was Twilight Princess and who up to this point knew its main villain to be Zant, may take the sages at their word and consider this story of execution as an irrelevant aside until later plot reveals. Other, more experienced players may have gone giddy with the initial mention and subsequent display of murder by one Ganondorf Dragmire. However, the most astute players would realize the problem arises not from this plot point or from Twilight Princess itself, but from its connection to an earlier game in the series. Like Rome, it seems all roads lead to Ocarina of Time, and it's in this little time-traveling masterpiece that things get morally ambiguous. As described by the Deku Tree Sprout, prior to the events of Ocarina of Time and before the King of Hyrule unified this country, there was a fierce war in this world. This is known as the Hyrulean Civil War. The circumstances of this war and any of its other details are largely unknown to us other than the outcome. When we first meet Zelda as young Link, we spy on Ganondorf as he pledges fealty to the King of Hyrule. This implies they were not allied in this civil war, and even now Zelda has a bad feeling about him. Now, if we played Ocarina of Time before Twilight Princess, we have the privilege of being on the right side of the dramatic irony. We know Ganondorf. We know what happens when we collect the spiritual stones, open the doors of time, and pull the Master Sword. We know what becomes of Hyrule, but we also know we defeat this King of Evil and get sent back in time to this moment. There are a couple of important things here. One, I've always interpreted this moment as being the same as when we first meet Zelda, which would mean we've just received the first spiritual stone from a dying Deku Tree, and that's as far as we've made it in our adventure. 2, this Ganondorf and the Ganondorf from Twilight Princess are literally the same person. And 3, in that 2007 interview, Aonuma adds context to the original story as told by the sages in the Mirror Chamber. He says, in Ocarina of Time, Link flew 7 years in time. He beat Ganon and went back to being a kid, remember? Twilight Princess takes place in the world of Ocarina of Time, 100 and something years after the piece returned to Kid Link's time. In the last scene of Ocarina of Time, kids Link and Zelda have a little talk, and as a consequence of that talk, the relationship with Ganon takes a whole new direction. In the middle of this game, there's a scene showing Ganon's execution. It was decided that Ganon be executed because he'd do something outrageous if they left him be. That scene takes place several years after Ocarina of Time. Ganon was sent to another world and now he wants to obtain the power. What this implies is that Link and Zelda, with their future knowledge of Ganondorf, the same that we have if we played Ocarina, turn him in, at which point he is sentenced to death. The difference is that if I'm an upstanding Hylian citizen, or a Gerudo one for that matter, living in the child timeline, and a royal emissary to the King of Hyrule said, well, they sentenced the Gerudo King to death because he'd do something outrageous if they left him be, I might consider that to be some bullshit. Because at this point, he hasn't actually done anything. Has he? Anuma's quote certainly doesn't make it seem so. He'd do something outrageous, not he already did something outrageous like kill the Deku Tree, which he did. And how does someone like the King of Hyrule make this decision based on the word of two kids, one claiming to have knowledge of the future? Although with the evidence of the happenings from beneath the well and in the Shadow Temple, not to mention the Arbiter's grounds, I'm not surprised the King of Hyrule, the supposed leader of the good guys, and his retinue of sages would moonlight as the Thought Police. Ultimately, while Ganondorf gets sentenced without committing an actual crime, he is still granted the Triforce of Power, survives that fatal blow, is banished to the Twilight Realm where he finds a weak mind to inhabit, and eventually uses his avatar to subjugate Hyrule and its citizens to a fate eerily similar to that as seen by adult Link. And so I ask you, was it, as the sages call it in their story, a divine prank? Or divine justice?